So part 2. Stop fucking rambling, Emma, and going off in tangents. So it's annoying this, I'm restricted to 15 minutes, because I do have a tendency to to go off. I've got so much to say, and so little time to say it, and so few people are interested in me, in me saying it. The people who are really interested in me not fucking saying it, there's definitely a few of them. Anyway, so after a couple of months I thought, I was armed with this evidence, this physical evidence of the bank statements, etc. I was having work done by a solicitor's called MFY Partnership in Airdrie, and he was one of the people that came into my house, although I didn't realise it was him because I'd never met this guy before in my life, this Andrew Fitzpatrick. I was dealing with a man from there called Scott Blair. This Andrew Fitzpatrick I'd never met. I met him afterwards, a few weeks afterwards. He'd been in my house because I didn't know who these people were. I'd never had any dealings with them, never met them. And I think they thought it was stay that way. So, like I said, I had stuff ongoing that I was dealing with through MFY Partnership in Airdrie. And they stopped answering my phone calls again. They wouldn't give me any information. They wouldn't send me any information. So I phoned up once and they said, Scott Blair, who I was dealing with, he has COVID. And I said, well, is there anyone else I can speak to? And she went, no, everyone has COVID. So I thought, fuck that. These people are just screwing me around, So I just turned up at the office one day. And this guy come down the stairs and he introduced himself as Scott Blair. Now, I'd met this guy, Scott Blair, and I'd spoke to him on the phone. And he has a really plummy voice. And this guy who came down the stairs was the guy who was in my house that night. And his name is Andrew Fitzpatrick. And I recognised him straight away. He actually said to me, you look very distracted, smirking. And I can describe him, he was kind of chubby, with kind of curly dark hair, a tattoo on the inside of his right arm, his right bicep, and he had a wedding ring on his right ring finger, And I said, what's your name? And he went, Scott Blair. And I said, you sound very different on the phone, because this guy had a stutter as well. And he went, I'm Scott Blair, And then he said, are you still living at the same address? And they told me that I was going to fuck off out this house, I thought, what a very strange question to ask me. Well, there we go. That's the second time I met Andrew Fitzpatrick, but to my knowledge, it was the first. I don't think he thought that I was going to recognise him, But anyway, so I went to the police. So I'd had a letter from MFY Partnership, and like I said, they said to me, we're moving into your house, you're going to move into this flat, or you're going to fuck off to the Isle of Wight. So the one letter I'd had from MFY Partnership, it was nothing. It contained no interesting information that I needed. But the postmark on it, these solicitors are based in Airdrie. It's the next town over from where I live. And the postmark on it, where it came from, was it postmarked the Isle of Wight, and it also had a stamp on it, the same as the stamp that's on the mail meant to threaten me, the Raymond Vickery mail, that's one of my videos, the hate mail video. It had a stamp on it saying mental health awareness as well, so that was from MFY Partnership that are in Airdrie, but it was postmarked Isle of Wight, the envelope. So I had this stuff and I took it to this police station, and they took me into a room, 3 of them, 2 guys and a woman, and the police in Scotland don't wear body cams. None of them in that room took out their notepads. I had the names of all these people, the names that are on my channel description. I had all their names at that point. I had this evidence, this physical evidence that I had access to my bank account, or someone had accessed my bank account within the bank, added the account numbers so that someone else could then go in and kind of use the information to find out other information about my accounts, etc., because it's like a whole network. They all do their little bits. They're all kind of different people doing different jobs within society, like different roles, high ups, low downs, etc. And I believe that the communication between them is kind of kept at minimum, so they'll probably communicate in person. But anyway, I went into this police station, gave them all this, and he said, none of the 3 of them wrote it down. And I said to the female police officer, look at this on my bank account. And she went, oh, that happens sometimes. I thought, no, it fucking doesn't. Like, it's never happened before, and it's never happened since. But there we go, they're gaslighting me. And he said, you seem very distressed. Let me make a phone call. One of them went out the room for 5 minutes. And then he came back and he handed me his phone and he went, this lady wants to speak to you. And she was, lo and behold, a mental health worker. She asked me what I was doing there. I told her it's none of her business. It's a police matter, wouldn't give her any information, although she had all of my medical history on the screen and started rolling it off to me, embarrassing things like STDs, rolling that off to me to try and embarrass me on the phone. They'd taken a step out of the door. And I ended the phone call with her, and then they came back in. They came back in and I handed him the phone, and he continued to speak to her outside the room, and then came back in and said, "What did she say?" And I said, "Well, just what she's just told you. She said, because you've been talking to her." They were like, "We're really concerned about you. We want you to come with us to hospital, I hadn't told them anything fantastical. All I told them was the names of these people. I showed them this evidence that I had. I said, "No, thank you. I don't want to come to hospital with you." They tried to force me, and I said no, but I obviously wasn't presenting as quite emotional enough for them to get away with kind of forcing me. That would come eventually. So I drove back home, and they actually passed me on the dual carriageway on the way back to Cumbernauld. This was a police station just outside Springburn. It overlooks the Royal Infirmary Hospital in Glasgow. I can't remember the name of it, but they drove past me on the dual carriageway on the way back. One of them smirked at me. The next time was, again, a couple of months on from that. Things were just getting fucking worse and worse and worse, It really was. Becoming, well, you all know yourself, you've all experienced it. It was just becoming fucking hellish, I didn't know if up was up and down was down. I didn't know anything. I was at the end of my rope, I was really thinking, what, I've been dropped in some weird place. So anyway, I'd had enough by that point. Again, I went to a police station in a town called Kilmarnock in Ayrshire, and when I was waiting in the waiting room, I said I wanted to speak to a police officer. These couple come in, they started using directed conversation centering around child abuse to me. She was giving me filthy looks, telling me that all people who abuse children should be fucking hung, which I agree with, because I'm not a child abuser. I was talking to a guy. He made some references to, again, directed conversation. Then he got a phone call, and the woman he answered the phone to a woman, and she shouted at him so loud that I could hear it, and said, "Don't let her tell you any lies." And he said, I'm not. I went outside for a cigarette. Eventually they let me in, and they took me into a room just off the waiting room. And there was a glass screen in front of me, and behind the screen was a camera. It was obviously meant to be like a mirror, but they hadn't switched the switch to make it a mirror, so it was just glass. And there was a camera, and they'd done this on purpose, And there's two police officers. Again, no body cams, and neither of them took any notice or anything. One of them held the door open off the waiting room with his foot, and I said, "Can we have some privacy so I can tell you what's happened?" And he said, "No, I'm too hot. I need to keep the door open." The waiting room had filled up by this time that I'd been waiting. All these people had fucking, funnily enough, arrived at the police station. The waiting room was full, All these people with urgent police inquiries because I'm there. I asked him again. I said, I'd really prefer it if you shut the door. People in the waiting room were looking directly at me through the door because he had it pushed open with his foot. And he said, "No, I'm really too hot. I can't shut the door. I'm dying in here." So I said, "That's fine. I'll go to another police station," and I left. And then drove down to Ayr police station, but it was shut. I pressed the buzzer, and it was they directed me to a police station in Fife and said, they asked for my phone number. I said, "I don't have a phone." I'd got rid of my phone by then. And she said, "Well, can you tell me all of your old numbers?" Which I thought was fucking weird as well. She told me it was shut for lunch. And then again, crowds began to form. This police station is right on a roundabout in Ayr. People were driving past, beeping their horns, driving past, smirking at me, smiling at me, people walking past, smirking at me. A crowd began to form outside, everyone waiting urgently for this police station. I was stood outside, and then one of the police officers inside began, I'm going to have to do a part 3, began flashing a torch from inside like one of those lights that you get to put inside cupboards, and it's got LED lights in it, like it's little dots of light, and he was flashing this from inside the police station. It was obviously a glass door, and flashing it on and off, and then putting the torch onto flash mode, so it would like flash 5 or 6 times, and then he would turn it off, and then turn it on normal, and then turn it off, and then turn it on to flash mode, and he just carried on doing this, And I'm thinking, what the fuck is going on? What the fuck is going on? Like, where am I? What's happening? I'll do a part 3 because I don't know how much time I've got.